Tuesday evenings had become my sanctuary of predictable ritual. The rain arrived precisely at 6:30, as it had for 3 weeks running, drumming against the windows with the kind of steady rhythm that made the world feel safely contained. I pulled into my driveway at 6:47. At the same minute, my automatic porch light clicked to life, casting its familiar amber glow across the wet steps. The routine never varied. Keys on the second hook, coat shaken and hung, kettle filled for tea. These small ceremonies had become my armor against the chaos of longer days and shorter patience. But tonight, as I reached for the doormat to shake off accumulated leaves, my fingers met something that didn't belong. A cream-colored envelope, thick and substantial, tucked precisely beneath the woven fibers. No postage stamp, no return address, no indication of postal delivery. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, with a weight that suggested intention rather than accident. It had been placed there recently. The edges were dry despite the steady rain, protected by the narrow eave, but positioned exactly where I would find it. I carried it inside, noting how the envelope seemed to glow against my kitchen table's dark wood surface. The rain intensified outside, shifting from gentle patter to more insistent drumming, as if nature itself was curious about this unexpected delivery. My kettle began its familiar whistle, but instead of my usual tea routine, I found myself studying the envelope under the pendant light. The flap wasn't sealed with modern adhesive. Instead, it bore the faint impression of what had once been a wax seal, now broken, leaving only a ghostly outline. Inside, 5 sepia-toned photographs slid out like secrets from another era. My breath caught as I recognized the subject. My street, Millbrook Avenue, captured from angles I knew intimately. Yet everything was subtly, impossibly different. The first photograph showed Mrs. Patterson's modest ranch home as an elegant Victorian with wraparound porch and ornate trim. The Hendersons' familiar blue shutters had been replaced by bay windows with decorative molding. The street itself appeared wider, lined with mature oak trees that would have taken decades to reach such magnificent proportions. I arranged the photographs in sequence, studying each detail with growing fascination. The quality suggested genuine period photography, that distinctive depth and clarity that modern reproductions never quite achieve. Pencil notations on the reverse indicated careful documentation. North elevation, morning light, and east approach, summer test. The handwriting leaned forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to precise observation. The final photograph stopped me completely. There, in the exact spot where my modest front lawn displayed its patch of grass and single maple tree, stood an elaborate stone fountain. Not some simple garden feature, but a genuine work of art. Carved figures dancing around a central column, water cascading in graceful tiers, surrounded by formal gardens with geometric pathways. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Cherubs and flowing water captured in stone, intricate scroll work along the basin's edge, benches positioned at perfect intervals for contemplation. I held the image closer to the light, studying every detail. Individual leaves were visible on surrounding trees. Coins glinted at the fountain's bottom, and the stone carving showed wear patterns that spoke of years of weather and admiration. This wasn't a proposal or artist's rendering. It was documentation of something that had actually existed, right here, where I now sat drinking tea and wondering. Beneath the photographs lay a single sheet of cream paper, matching the envelope. The handwriting was elegant, flowing script executed with what must have been a fountain pen. The ink, a rich sepia that complemented the photographs perfectly. The past echoes in the present. Listen to the rain. That was all. No signature, no explanation, no context for these impossible images of my familiar street, transformed into something from a more gracious era. I read the words again, feeling their rhythm match the steady percussion of raindrops against my windows. The rain, had it always sounded so purposeful? Each drop seemed to carry weight beyond its physical presence, as if the storm itself was trying to communicate something important. My porch light flickered once, a brief tremor that coincided with a pause in the rain's rhythm. The wall clock above my pantry clicked to 7:03, then hesitated for the briefest moment before resuming its steady march. Small systems registering change, responding to something I couldn't yet understand. Who had left these photographs? The timing suggested someone familiar with my routine, someone who knew the shelter of my eve and the precise moment of my return. The envelope had appeared as if by magic, materializing between my afternoon departure and evening arrival. No delivery service had knocked. No neighbors had mentioned visitors. It was as if time itself had reached forward to place these images in my path. I spread the photographs across my table again, creating a gallery of impossible memories. Tomorrow I would visit the library. Millbrook's Historical Society maintained thorough records, and if such a fountain had ever graced our neighborhood, there would be documentation. City planning documents, old newspapers, perhaps even more photographs that could explain how my quiet street had transformed from this elegant Victorian scene into its current suburban incarnation. The rain continued its steady conversation with my windows, and I found myself listening with new attention. What messages might be hidden in that familiar sound that had provided the soundtrack to countless peaceful evenings? Outside my window, the grass patch where the fountain had supposedly stood looked different somehow, though I couldn't articulate exactly how. Perhaps it was simply the power of suggestion, but the ground seemed to hold secrets, promising revelations that would transform my understanding of this place I called home. The past echoes in the present. Listen to the rain. Tonight, for the first time in memory, I would fall asleep to raindrops that seemed to be telling me a story I was finally ready to hear. Wednesday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, transforming the previous night's mystery into actionable purpose. The photographs lay spread across my breakfast table like pieces of an unfinished puzzle, their sepia tones catching early sunlight streaming through kitchen windows. Sleep had been restless, filled with dreams of flowing water and carved stone, but dawn brought renewed determination. The Millbrook Historical Society opened at 9, and I intended to be their first visitor. The Historical Society occupied the basement level of our modest public library, accessed through a narrow staircase that creaked with decades of footsteps. Dust motes danced in shafts of filtered light from high windows, creating an atmosphere where time moved differently, more deliberately. The air carried distinctive scents of old paper, leather bindings, and preservation chemicals, the perfume of carefully maintained memories. Mrs. Eleanor Albright emerged from behind towering filing cabinets like a guardian of forgotten knowledge. Her silver hair was pulled into a practical bun, wire-rimmed glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She had served as the Society's volunteer archivist for nearly 30 years. Her reputation for encyclopedic knowledge of local history legendary among longtime residents. "Well, this is certainly unusual," she said, examining the photographs I'd arranged across her research table. Her fingers traced the ornate stonework with practiced reverence. "These appear genuine, but I don't recall this particular fountain in our collections. The craftsmanship suggests late Victorian era, perhaps 1880s or 1890s. She disappeared into the maze of filing systems and returned with manila folders and rolled maps. "Let's see what city planning documents reveal about your neighborhood's history." Her movements were precise, economical, the result of decades navigating these archives. She unrolled a large map dated 1889, weighing corners with smooth river stones that served as permanent paperweights. "Here's Millbrook Avenue in its original configuration," she said, pointing to a street bearing little resemblance to its current incarnation. "Much wider than, with formal landscaping and what appears to be—" She paused, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, there it is. A central water feature at the intersection." My pulse quickened as I recognized the fountain's location exactly where my house now stood. The map showed not just the fountain, but an intricate network of thin blue lines radiating outward, delicate veins spreading throughout the neighborhood like a circulatory system. "These lines represent the underground aqueduct system," Mrs. Albright explained, her voice taking on enthusiasm reserved for favorite subjects. "Millbrook was quite progressive in water management. They tapped natural springs 3 miles north and created an elaborate distribution network. The fountain served as both decorative centerpiece and functional pressure release valve." She produced another map from 1923. The system was gradually abandoned as modern plumbing became standard. By the 1920s, most had been sealed and forgotten. "But look here." Her finger traced blue lines converging beneath what was now my property. "Your house sits directly above the main junction point. 3 major lines converge there, with secondary branches serving surrounding blocks." The implications dawned on me. "So there are still pipes beneath my house?" "Most certainly," Mrs. Albright nodded. "The city never removed them. Too expensive and disruptive, they simply capped access points and let nature take its course. The infrastructure remains largely intact." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "There are local legends, you know. Old-timers claim that during heavy rains, you can still hear the old pipes singing beneath the town, water finding its way through cracks and fissures, following paths carved more than a century ago." As if summoned by her words, thunder rumbled across the morning sky. Through high windows, I watched clouds gathering with surprising speed, transforming clear morning into something more dramatic. The change felt purposeful, as if weather itself was responding to our conversation about water and forgotten channels. Mrs. Albright pulled out a detailed engineering diagram from 1891, signed by someone named Elias Thorne, civil engineer. The drawing showed cross-sections of the pipe system with meticulous attention to elevation changes, pressure points, and flow dynamics. "Mr. Thorne was quite the visionary," she said. "His system worked with natural water pressure and gravity flow. Very sophisticated for its time." The diagram revealed something remarkable. The main junction beneath my property wasn't just a simple intersection. It was an engineered chamber, a hub designed to regulate flow and pressure throughout the entire network. Thorne had included detailed notes about seasonal adjustments and maintenance procedures, written in precise handwriting that seemed familiar. Before I could examine the signature more closely, The first drops of rain began striking high windows with increasing intensity. The sound was different here in the basement, more muffled, more resonant, as if the building itself was responding to water's return. Mrs. Albright paused in her document gathering, tilting her head slightly. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. I listened carefully. Beneath obvious sounds of rain against glass and the building's settling creaks, there was something else, a faint, almost musical humming that seemed to emanate from deep within the walls themselves. It was rhythmic, purposeful, like a distant song carried through hidden channels. "The old-timers aren't entirely wrong," Mrs. Albright whispered. "Sometimes when conditions are just right, the past makes itself known." The humming grew more pronounced as rain intensified, creating subtle harmony that seemed to resonate through the floor beneath our feet. I thought of my house, built directly above Thorne's main junction chamber, and wondered what other secrets might be stirring to life beneath familiar foundations. Rain drummed steadily against windows now, and I found myself eager to return home, to listen more carefully to sounds my house made during storms. The thought of returning to a house built above a forgotten junction where 3 underground rivers once converged filled me with anticipation rather than apprehension. Whatever was flowing beneath my foundations had been waiting a very long time to be rediscovered. The rain had transformed from morning drizzle into steady downpour. By the time I returned home, Mrs. Albright's borrowed metal detector secured carefully in my trunk, alongside photocopied maps and engineering diagrams. The rhythmic drumming against my roof felt purposeful now, not merely weather, but conversation between past and present, water calling to forgotten channels after decades of separation. Mrs. Albright had insisted I borrow the detector from their collection. "Mr. Henderson donated it after his treasure hunting phase," she'd explained with fond amusement. "Perfect for historical investigations." The device was older than expected, a Garrett model from the 1980s with analog dials and worn leather grip. But she assured me it would locate ferrous metals through several inches of plaster and concrete. My basement had always seemed unremarkable. Concrete floor, painted cinder block walls, exposed ceiling joists supporting the house above. I'd stored Christmas decorations and forgotten furniture here for years, without paying attention to architectural details. But now, armed with knowledge of what lay beneath my foundations, I studied the space with archaeological interest. The metal detector felt substantial in my hands as I switched it on, listening to its initial electronic whine settle into steady baseline hum. I began systematically sweeping the floor, moving in overlapping patterns across concrete that had seemed uniform but now revealed subtle variations in color and texture. The device remained mostly silent, offering occasional false alarms from heating ducts and electrical conduits running through overhead joists. It was the western wall that changed everything. As I approached the section directly beneath my living room, the detector's tone shifted from baseline hum to hesitant beeping. The wall here looked different, not dramatically, but with subtle variations I'd never noticed. The cinder blocks appeared older, their mortar joints wider and more weathered. The paint was slightly different shade, as if this section had been patched or refinished separately from surrounding areas. I ran the detector slowly along the wall's base, watching analog needles dance with increasing excitement. The beeping intensified, becoming rapid clicks that suggested significant metal presence just beyond the painted surface. According to Thorne's diagrams, the main access chamber should be precisely here, behind what appeared to be solid wall. Setting the detector aside, I examined the wall more carefully. What I'd initially dismissed as minor paint variations now revealed themselves as almost imperceptible lines, vertical seams that might indicate hidden joints or sealed openings. Running my fingers along these faint boundaries, I could feel slight depressions where plaster had settled differently, creating hairline cracks that spoke of something other than solid masonry. The rain above intensified, drumming insistent encouragement against foundation walls. Each drop seemed to urge deeper investigation, as if water itself was eager to reconnect with forgotten channels. I retrieved a small hammer and chisel from my toolbox, approaching the wall with archaeological reverence rather than demolition enthusiasm. The first gentle tap revealed hollow sound rather than solid resistance. Working carefully, I began chipping away small sections of plaster and paint, revealing not cinder block or brick, but something entirely different. Behind the modern facade lay heavy iron plate, dark with age and oxidation but still structurally sound. The metal surface bore raised letters that had been painted over repeatedly, but remained legible under careful examination. Millbrook Waterworks, 1891, E. Thorne, E.N.G. This was it, Elias Thorne's original access point to the main junction chamber. The iron plate was roughly 4 feet square, with heavy hinges along one side and what appeared to be substantial locking mechanism on the other. Decades of paint and corrosion had sealed it shut, but the basic structure remained intact, waiting for rediscovery. I continued chipping away accumulated layers, revealing more details of Thorne's engineering. The plate was set into carefully constructed frame, with drainage channels designed to direct any seepage away from the basement's main floor. Even after a century, the craftsmanship was impressive. Built to last, designed with maintenance access in mind. The locking mechanism proved to be simple but robust lever system, corroded but not completely frozen. With patient application of penetrating oil and gentle persuasion, I felt the first movement in decades as ancient gears began to yield. The sound was remarkable. Not harsh grinding, but almost musical groaning as metal remembered its purpose. Rain continued its steady commentary from above, and I found myself pausing to listen more carefully. The sound had layers, now that I understood what lay beneath my foundation. Surface runoff from gutters and downspouts provided obvious percussion, but underneath was something more subtle. The whisper of water finding its way into cracks and fissures, following gravity toward forgotten channels that had been waiting patiently for its return. As the locking mechanism finally released with satisfying click, I felt cool air moving past my face. Not the stagnant atmosphere of sealed space, but gentle circulation that suggested open passages beyond. The iron plate swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing darkness that seemed both inviting and mysterious. My flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet into what appeared to be narrow passage, sloping gently downward. The walls were lined with original brick, still sound after more than a century underground. The air carried scents of earth and old water, mineral-rich and clean, rather than musty or threatening. Somewhere in that darkness lay Thorne's main junction chamber, the heart of a water system that had once served the entire neighborhood. The passage beckoned with promise of answers to questions I was only beginning to formulate. The darkness beyond the iron plate held secrets that had been waiting more than a century for someone curious enough to rediscover them. The iron plate swung fully open with a long, protesting groan that seemed to release decades of held breath. Cool air flowed past my face like a living invitation, carrying scents that belonged to another era. Mineral-rich earth, old iron, and the ghost of flowing water that had once moved through these channels with purpose and grace. My flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing a carefully constructed passage that defied my expectations of a simple utility tunnel. The corridor was wider than anticipated, nearly 4 feet across with an arched ceiling rising 7 feet at its center. The brickwork was extraordinary, each brick laid with precision that spoke of master craftsmen who took pride in work that might never be seen by daylight. This wasn't hasty municipal construction, but architecture built to endure centuries. The mortar joints remained sound, testament to Thorne's insistence on quality that would outlast its creators. As I stepped inside, testing the footing carefully, the familiar percussion of rain above transformed into distant whisper, muffled by earth and stone into rhythmic encouragement that seemed to urge deeper exploration. Each step took me further from my basement into a realm where time moved differently, where decades compressed into moments and craft endured through patient darkness. The passage sloped gently downward, following what must have been carefully calculated grade to maintain optimal water flow. Condensation beaded on the walls like tiny lenses, each droplet catching my flashlight beam in crystalline points of light. The air, though cool, was surprisingly fresh, not the stagnant atmosphere of sealed space, but gentle circulation that suggested open channels beyond my vision. 20 feet into the passage, my light caught something that made me pause. Faint markings along the eastern wall, barely visible beneath accumulated moisture and mineral deposits. These weren't random scratches or natural formations, but deliberate notation carved directly into brick faces. Some resembled surveyor's marks, parallel lines with numbers beneath reading 47, 52, 58, followed by what appeared to be initials. Others looked more personal. A vertical tally group, circles bisected by short strokes, shallow arrows pointing downslope. I traced one marking with my gloved finger, feeling the groove's smoothness and softened edges that only time provides. This was working language, communication between builders who had spent months underground mapping and constructing Thorne's elaborate system. The markings repeated at measured intervals, creating navigation system for those who worked in perpetual darkness. The passage curved gently to the left, following natural contours that influenced Thorne's original design. Every 10 paces, weep holes vented moisture. Every 5th weep hole carried a slow drip that struck stones set purposely below to silence splatter. Even in abandonment, the engineering functioned as intended, channeling water with quiet efficiency. 50 feet from the entrance, the passage widened into a small alcove. Not structural necessity, but intentional space cut into the northern wall. The recess was perhaps 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, with brick shelving integrated into the overall construction. This was deliberate architecture, designed for storage or rest during long underground shifts. On the lowest shelf, objects waited in patient stillness. A tarnished brass compass sat precisely centered, its face clouded with age, but needle still responding to magnetic north with trembling accuracy. The back was engraved with flowing script. To E.T. for paths yet to be discovered, M.A. 1890. A gift from someone who understood Thorne's passion for exploration and engineering, the instrument remained functional after more than a century underground. Beside it lay a leather-bound journal, its pages fused together by decades of moisture but cover still legible. Property of E. Thorne, Field Notes, 1891. The leather had darkened to deep brown, preserved by consistent cool temperature and mineral-rich air that discouraged decay. Careful examination revealed fragments of text in Thorne's precise handwriting, technical notes about water pressure interspersed with personal observations. The sound changes with the seasons. Spring runoff creates symphony, while autumn brings whispers of preparation. Most intriguing was a single boot, petrified by mineral deposits into something resembling carved stone, while retaining every detail of its original form. The leather had been replaced molecule by molecule with calcium carbonate, creating perfect fossil of 19th century craftsmanship. The heel carried a manufacturer's stamp, half readable under calcite bloom. The toe showed careful patch stitched with waxed thread. Someone of modest stature had walked these tunnels when they were new. These weren't random artifacts or accidental losses. They had been placed here deliberately, arranged with care that suggested memorial purpose. The compass faced true north. The journal lay positioned as if recently consulted, and the boot was placed as if its owner had simply stepped out before continuing deeper into the system. As I studied these objects, I felt profound connection to those who had walked these passages before me. Thorne and his assistants had spent months underground, eating meals by lamplight, consulting compass bearings in perpetual darkness, and leaving pieces of themselves for future discoverers. This wasn't mere municipal utility, it was exploration driven by curiosity and wonder, engineering elevated to art form. I photographed each artifact carefully, framing them with a ruler for scale the way proper archaeological survey required. The compass lifted easily, its weight speaking of precision instruments rather than casual equipment. The journal proved more delicate, its fused pages requiring patience and preservation techniques I remembered from university fieldwork. The passage continued beyond the alcove, curving gracefully into darkness that my flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. The curve was deliberate, following natural contours or avoiding obstacles that had influenced Thorne's design. A ribbon of clearer runoff traced the center line, marking the builder's understanding of grade and flow. Whatever lay ahead had drawn these 19th century engineers deeper underground, compelling them to carve passages through solid earth in pursuit of vision that transcended simple water distribution. The artifacts whispered of dedication and purpose, of hands that had shaped stone with patience and measured trust. The darkness ahead felt less like void and more like promise, a continuation of story begun more than a century ago, waiting for someone curious enough to follow the gentle curve into deeper knowledge. The transition from underground exploration to domestic comfort felt surreal as I carried Thorne's journal upstairs, treating it with the reverence reserved for ancient artifacts. My living room's warm electric lighting and soft furniture contrasted sharply with the damp brick passages below, yet the mystery remained as compelling as ever. Rain continued its gentle percussion against windows, but now each drop carried potential meaning rather than mere atmospheric accompaniment. The journal's leather cover had survived remarkably well, its deep brown patina speaking of quality materials and careful preservation by consistent underground conditions. Brass corner reinforcements bore Thorne's initials in flowing script, while the embossed title read Field Observations and Engineering Notes, 1891-1892. This wasn't casual documentation, but systematic record-keeping by someone who understood the importance of preserving knowledge for future generations. Separating the moisture-fused pages required archaeological patience. I set up a makeshift humidification station with a kettle and clean towels, using dental tools borrowed from my brother, to gently tease apart paper that had merged into solid blocks over decades of humidity. Steam helped soften the bonds, while careful pressure gradually revealed individual pages without destroying their fragile contents. The scent of old paper, faintly metallic and earthy, filled the room, the perfume of history unfolding. The first successfully separated page bore Thorne's distinctive handwriting in fading but legible ink. His script was precise yet flowing, the hand of someone equally comfortable with technical specifications and personal reflection. The entry was dated March 15, 1891. Foundation work progresses despite unseasonable rains. The men grow restless working in perpetual darkness, but I find profound peace in these chambers we are creating. Water seeks its own level, follows paths of least resistance, yet can be guided by those who understand its nature. Technical diagrams filled the margins. Cross-sections of pipe joints, elevation calculations, and flow dynamics rendered with drafting precision. But interwoven with engineering data were philosophical observations that revealed Thorne's deeper motivations. He wrote not merely as municipal employee, but as someone pursuing vision that transcended simple water distribution. As I carefully separated more pages, Thorne's personality emerged through accumulated entries. He documented seasonal changes in underground acoustics, noting how spring snowmelt created symphony of purpose, while autumn brought whispered preparation for winter's rest. He observed how different weather patterns affected water pressure throughout the system, recording not just measurements, but emotional responses to the sounds and rhythms of flowing water. The most intriguing entries concerned what Thorne called the heart of the fountain, a central chamber that served as more than mere junction point. According to his notes, this space was designed to regulate pressure and flow throughout the entire network, but also to serve what he cryptically termed the town's listening post. Page 47 contained detailed architectural drawings that made my pulse quicken. The chamber was far more elaborate than simple utility space, a circular room with vaulted ceiling, surrounded by intricate mechanism of gears, levers, and flow controls. Thorne's annotations described harmonic resonance chambers and sympathetic vibration channels that suggested purposes beyond hydraulic engineering. One passage, dated September 3, 1891, proved particularly revealing. The mechanism nears completion. Each component serves dual purpose, practical water management, and what I can only describe as communion with the town's essential rhythms. The heart will listen to rain as it approaches, or respond to seasonal changes, and maintain harmony between human need and natural abundance. The key is not metal or wood, but understanding of water's own language. The accompanying diagram showed interconnected system of remarkable complexity. Gears and levers were arranged in patterns that resembled clockwork, but with organic curves that followed natural principles rather than mechanical precision. Channels carved into chamber walls would direct water flow in specific patterns, creating acoustic effects that Thorne described as the town's heartbeat made audible. Most fascinating was Thorne's description of the activation sequence. The mechanism required specific combination of manual adjustments and natural conditions, human intention working in harmony with weather patterns. One entry included what appeared to be musical notation, vertical marks across 5 faint lines, each annotated with rainfall rates and barometric pressure. Underneath he wrote, "To admit the heart, follow the rain's own cadence, the triplet that follows the slack, then the long." I paused, listening to the rain outside with new attention. The familiar rhythm suddenly seemed purposeful. Brief lull, 3 quick taps, then sustained pour. Thorne had embedded his activation sequence in the very weather patterns that sustained life. The journal contained hand-drawn maps showing the complete underground network, with the heart chamber marked as central hub from which all other passages radiated. My house sat directly above this engineering marvel, built unknowingly atop Thorne's masterpiece of functional art. Near the back, a series of short entries read like field instructions. If the western lever sticks, warm the collar with breath, not flame. Counterweight south responds best after first inch of rain. Listen for the farthest pipe in easterlies. It complains before all others. Each note linked practice to weather, maintenance to sky. Thorne's final entries, dated December 1892, carried tone of both satisfaction and melancholy. The system functions beyond my highest expectations. Water flows where needed, pressure remains constant, and the heart responds to weather changes with almost sentient awareness. Yet I fear future generations will see only utility where we have created symphony. The mechanisms will be forgotten, the chambers sealed, and the town's heartbeat will fall silent. His prediction had proven remarkably accurate. But Thorne had built with permanence in mind, creating mechanisms robust enough to survive decades of neglect, while waiting for someone curious enough to rediscover their purpose. The journal's final page contained cryptic instructions for reactivating the heart. Thorne wrote of natural key that would unlock the mechanism's full potential, not physical object, but understanding of rain's language and willingness to work within natural rhythms rather than against them. Outside, rain continued its patient conversation with earth and stone, each drop now carrying potential significance in Thorne's elaborate code. The engineer had embedded his legacy in the very weather patterns that sustained life, creating system that would remain dormant until someone learned to listen with proper attention. Tomorrow I would return to the tunnels armed with Thorne's maps and instructions, ready to discover whether his mechanical symphony could still respond to the conductor's baton of falling rain. Thorne's journal rested against my forearm like a compass of ink and memory as I descended once more through the iron portal into the cool embrace of the underground passages. The familiar percussion of rain above filtered down through earth and mortar, creating a muffled symphony that seemed to welcome my return. Each step carried me deeper into a world where time moved differently, where decades compressed into moments and forgotten engineering waited patiently for rediscovery. The journal's hand-drawn maps served as perfect navigation guide, leading me past the memorial alcove where compass, boot, and fused pages still maintained their silent vigil. The passage continued beyond my previous exploration, following Thorne's calculated grade toward what his notes described with reverent precision as the system's beating heart. The air grew progressively cooler as I descended, carrying mineral scents that spoke of deeper earth and water that had filtered through limestone for centuries. The tunnel's character evolved as I progressed. Careful brickwork gave way to natural stone walls that had been smoothed and shaped rather than completely rebuilt. Thorne had worked with existing geology here, following natural fissures and chambers that predated human settlement. The engineering was more sophisticated, adapting to landscape rather than imposing upon it, a philosophy that permeated every aspect of his visionary design. Most remarkably, the sound changed. What had been occasional dripping became more pronounced, almost musical in its regularity. Each drop seemed to fall with precise timing, creating rhythm that echoed through stone passages with hypnotic persistence. According to Thorne's marginalia, this acoustic signature indicated proximity to the main chamber, where natural springs fed the system with water that had journeyed through underground channels for generations. 40 feet beyond the alcove, the passage opened dramatically into a space that stole my breath entirely. My flashlight beam swept across a circular chamber, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows beyond my light's reach. This wasn't merely functional utility space, but architecture that bordered on cathedral grandeur. A testament to Thorne's understanding that great engineering transcends mere function to become art. The walls curved seamlessly from floor to ceiling, constructed of fitted stone blocks that created perfect acoustic environment. Every sound, dripping water, footsteps, even breathing, acquired musical quality that transformed mundane into sublime. Thorne had designed this space not just as mechanical hub, but as resonance chamber, where the town's hydraulic heartbeat could be heard and felt. But it was the chamber's center that commanded absolute attention. There, rising from the stone floor like some mechanical altar, stood Thorne's masterpiece, a complex array of gears, levers, and pipes that represented the physical manifestation of his philosophical vision. Even after decades of abandonment, the mechanism retained dignity and purpose that spoke of master craftsman's dedication to both function and beauty. The central structure rose nearly 6 feet from the chamber floor, its components arranged in patterns that followed organic principles rather than purely mechanical logic. Brass gears, green with patina but structurally sound, meshed with iron wheels that had developed rust patterns resembling natural mineral staining. Levers extended at calculated angles, their positions corresponding to diagrams in Thorne's journal with remarkable accuracy. Pipes of varying diameters emerged from chamber walls at precisely measured points, converging on the central mechanism like spokes approaching a hub. Some carried evidence of recent water flow, mineral deposits, and algae growth, indicating the system wasn't entirely dormant. Others showed signs of deliberate sealing, capped with brass fittings bearing Thorne's initials and dates of final closure. Most intriguing was the constant rhythmic dripping that provided soundtrack to this underground theater. High above, barely visible in my flashlight's reach, a natural fissure in the chamber ceiling allowed water to fall with metronomic precision onto a small concave basin positioned at the mechanism's base. The basin was carved from single piece of limestone, its surface polished smooth by decades of water impact. Each drop struck the basin with soft, bell-like tone that resonated through the chamber's acoustic design. The water didn't simply collect and overflow. Instead, it followed carefully carved channels that directed flow to specific components of the mechanism. Thorn had designed the system to be powered by the very element it was meant to distribute, water activating water in endless sustainable cycle. The genius of Thorn's design revealed itself as I studied the mechanism more carefully. This wasn't simply water distribution system, but mechanical instrument designed to respond to atmospheric conditions with sensitivity that bordered on sentience. Changes in rainfall would alter the dripping rate, affecting the mechanism's timing, which would adjust pressure and flow throughout the entire network. As I examined the intricate arrangement, consulting Thorn's diagrams to understand each component's purpose, something remarkable occurred. The constant dripping, which had maintained steady rhythm since my arrival, suddenly intensified. The sound of rain above ground, muffled by earth and stone, had strengthened into more substantial shower. The increased precipitation was finding its way through limestone fissures, adding volume to the ceiling drip that powered Thorn's creation. The effect was immediate and profound. One of the larger brass gears, which had remained motionless for decades, shifted with soft but audible clunk that reverberated through the chamber like a heartbeat resuming after long sleep. The movement was subtle, perhaps a quarter turn, but unmistakably purposeful. Water had provided sufficient force to overcome rust and mineral deposits, awakening mechanism that had waited patiently for proper conditions. The chamber seemed to hold its breath after that first movement, as if the entire space was listening for what might come next. Other gears remained poised, ready to respond to additional water flow. Levers trembled slightly, balanced on the edge of activation. The weighted arm that Thorn had labeled Admit Delay Sing crept imperceptibly toward its first position, responding to the ancient call of falling rain. I stood transfixed, watching Thorn's vision manifest in real time. This was more than historical curiosity or archaeological discovery. It was communion with engineering genius who had understood something profound about the relationship between human innovation and natural forces. The soft clunk of that first gear movement echoed in my memory as I realized I was witnessing the reawakening of Millbrook's mechanical heart, designed to beat in rhythm with the rain. The darkness beyond my light seemed pregnant with possibility, promising revelations that would transform my understanding of the forgotten world beneath my feet. The single gear's movement had transformed the chamber from dormant museum to expectant workshop. Thorn's mechanism, poised between decades of sleep and the promise of a full awakening. I returned with his journal open to the operational pages, studying diagrams that now resonated with tangible purpose. The engineer's careful annotations guided my hands toward levers and wheels that had waited more than a century for someone to understand their language. The first component bore Thorn's precise label, Western Prime, engage at slack tide. In this underground realm, slack tide could only refer to the momentary pause in the ceiling's rhythmic dripping. I waited, listening to the water's natural cadence until the drops slowed to their briefest hesitation. The brass lever resisted initially, rust and mineral deposits protesting after decades of dormancy, but yielded with patient pressure. A soft click echoed through the chamber as ancient mechanisms remembered their purpose. The second lever required more delicate timing. Positioned lower on the mechanism's eastern face, it controlled what Thorn called seasonal balance. His marginalia warned that activation required harmony with atmospheric conditions, specifically the rain cadence he had encoded throughout his system. I listened carefully to the intensifying storm above, waiting for the pattern that had become familiar. The brief lull, followed by 3 quick drops, then the sustained pour. At the moment of the triplet that follows the slack, I engaged the lever with gentle but decisive pressure. The components settled into position with satisfying precision, triggering faint gurgling deep within the pipe network as water began responding to new pathways. The chamber's acoustic signature shifted subtly, ancient harmonics awakening as the system prepared for full activation. The third component was a wheel rather than lever, positioned at the mechanism's heart with spokes radiating like compass points. Thorn had labeled it Harmonic Governor, Regulate by Storm's Voice. This element would control the system's overall responsiveness, determining how the mechanism would react to changing conditions above ground. The wheel required both hands and considerable force to overcome initial resistance. As it began turning following the precise marks Thorn had etched into its rim, I felt the entire mechanism responding with growing enthusiasm. Gears meshed with increasingly smooth precision. Pipes hummed with building pressure, and the chamber filled with sounds that spoke of complex hydraulic symphony preparing for performance. Each activation triggered responses throughout the network. Distant pipes, silent for decades, began carrying water with musical gurgles that echoed through tunnels I hadn't yet explored. The sound was remarkable, not harsh industrial noise, but organic rhythm that suggested living system awakening after long hibernation. The chamber air grew thick with anticipation, punctuated by the rhythmic dripping from above and occasional groans of ancient machinery finding their voices. I worked methodically, cross-referencing each action with Thorn's diagrams, ensuring every component was correctly positioned. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. I was breathing life back into engineering that had been dormant longer than my own lifetime. Finally, I reached the master control, a substantial brass handle positioned directly beneath the dripping basin. Thorn's journal described this as fountain release, admit the heart's voice. His instructions were elegantly simple. Engage with the sustained heart note of the storm. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain above intensify into steady roar that vibrated through the chamber stones. The ceiling drips had merged into continuous stream, creating deep, resonant tone as water moved through carved channels. This was Thorn's sustained heart note, the moment when sky and earth sang in harmony. With deep breath, I grasped the brass handle and pushed it forward. It moved with decisive click that echoed through the chamber like struck bell. Immediately, a low rumble began, not the groan of old metal, but deep, resonant vibration that pulsed through the floor and into my bones. The sound grew steadily louder, rising crescendo that filled the chamber with decades of accumulated potential energy. Then, unmistakably, came the sound of rushing water. Not mere dripping or humming, but powerful, surging roar of countless gallons moving through confined spaces deep within the radiating pipes. It was sound that had been silenced for generations, now resurrected, torrent of liquid life flowing through veins of stone and iron. The ground beneath my feet trembled as I scrambled back through the passage, heart pounding with mixture of awe and anticipation. The distant roar of rushing water followed me, powerful testament to Thorn's genius, finally unleashed. Bursting through my basement into the evening air, I could hear it, faint but unmistakable gurgling emanating from the earth itself, coming from directly beneath my front lawn where historical photographs had shown the ornate fountain in Victorian splendor. The overgrown grass patch began to stir. Individual blades trembled as if touched by underground wind, movement spreading outward in 6-foot circle. The earth seemed to breathe, responding to pressures building in sealed chambers since the mechanism's activation. Then, with sudden drama that made me scramble backward, a muddy geyser erupted from the disturbance's center. Dark water shot 3 feet into the air, carrying fragments of soil and root systems that had grown over the forgotten fountain's foundation. The initial burst was chaotic, brown with decades of accumulated earth, but as I watched in amazement, the water began to clear. The rain, which had been falling steadily throughout my underground adventure, seemed to pause, as if nature itself was watching this moment of resurrection. The night grew quieter, with only the sound of Thorn's fountain sputtering to life after more than a century of silence. The muddy geyser gradually settled into controlled stream rising 2 feet above ground, before falling back in graceful arc. With each pulse, decades of sediment gave way to clean flow that Thorn's system was designed to provide. The fountain had found its rhythm and begun to sing. The fountain's violent birth gradually transformed into something approaching grace. The muddy geyser that had erupted with such dramatic force slowly settled, decades of accumulated sediment giving way to crystalline water that caught moonlight with prismatic beauty. Within minutes, the chaotic torrent found its natural rhythm, a steady stream rising 18 inches from earth in graceful arc, before falling back into an expanding pool that formed precisely where Victorian photographs had shown the original fountain's basin. The rain, which had provided atmospheric crescendo for this resurrection, diminished to gentle mist before stopping entirely. Night air carried scents of wet earth and ozone, punctuated by soft splash of water returning to stone. Above, clouds parted to reveal star-studded sky, and nearly full moon cast silver light across the fountain's pristine surface. The transformation was remarkable. From my modest front lawn to something approaching enchantment, water filtered through limestone and ancient pipes, creating subtle shimmer with microscopic particles of mica and quartz. As I approached the fountain's edge, kneeling on grass still damp from evening rain, I became aware of something extraordinary. Beneath the obvious sound of flowing water lay something more subtle, a faint, almost melodic humming that seemed to emanate from the pool itself, rather than mechanical flow. The sound was unmistakable, harmonic resonance created by water moving through carefully calculated spaces. Thorn had designed acoustic properties into his creation, transforming simple water distribution into musical expression. I retrieved Thorn's journal from inside, settling onto my front steps to examine the final entries I hadn't yet fully absorbed. The engineer's concluding thoughts, written in December 1892, revealed depths of purpose that transcended mere municipal utility. His handwriting remained precise but carried emotional weight, suggesting these words were intended as testament rather than technical documentation. The fountain nears completion, though I suspect few will understand its true purpose, he had written. Yes, it will provide water to those who need it, regulate pressure throughout our distribution network, and serve practical needs of our growing community. But these mechanical functions are merely visible manifestation of something far more profound. Thorne's philosophy unfolded across subsequent pages with increasing eloquence. He described the fountain not as engineering project, but as listening post for the town's collective memory, physical manifestation of connection between human settlement and natural forces that sustained it. The underground chambers, acoustic resonance, weather-responsive mechanisms, all were designed to create harmony between human innovation and environmental cycles. Future generations may forget the springs that first drew settlers to this place, he continued. They may pave over streams that once ran openly through meadows now claimed by houses and commerce. But the fountain will remember. It will sing songs of water that has traveled through limestone darkness for centuries, carrying minerals and memories from depths that predate human habitation. The most revealing entry described the fountain's role as bridge between past and future. I have embedded in this system not merely pipes and gears, but invitation to listen, to hear whispers of rain as it speaks of seasons and cycles, to understand that our human stories are part of larger narrative written in stone and stream. The fountain will serve as quiet sentinel, reminding those who pause to notice that extraordinary legacies often lie hidden beneath mundane surfaces. As I read these words beside the gently flowing fountain that had materialized from historical photographs and underground exploration, the melodic humming grew more apparent. This wasn't merely utility infrastructure, but public art designed to elevate daily routine into something approaching reverence. The pool's surface reflected moonlight in patterns that shifted with each pulse of incoming water, revealing through clear depths the original stone basin that had been buried beneath decades of accumulated soil. The mystery that had begun with cream envelope and sepia photographs was resolved, but understanding brought deeper appreciation rather than simple closure. The photographs hadn't been mysterious message from unknown sender, but documentation of Thorne's legacy waiting to be rediscovered. The underground passages weren't hidden secrets, but invitation to explore foundations upon which present comfort rested. Most remarkably, I realized Thorne's vision extended beyond his own lifetime. He had anticipated that future generations might lose connection with natural systems that sustained them, becoming so focused on modern convenience that they forgot springs, streams, and seasonal cycles that made human settlement possible. The fountain served as gentle reminder, not demanding attention, but offering quiet testimony to those curious enough to listen. The town slept around me, unaware that their neighborhood had gained a voice speaking of deeper connections between human community and natural world. Tomorrow neighbors would notice the fountain and wonder about its sudden appearance. Some might investigate, perhaps discovering their own connections to Thorne's vision. Others might simply appreciate beauty of water, flowing in moonlight, finding peace in sounds that connected them to cycles larger than daily routine. I remained beside the fountain as night deepened, listening to its quiet song and understanding that rain would forever carry new significance. Each storm would bring messages written in rhythm and flow, connecting present moments to historical depths stretching back through geological time. The fountain would continue its patient vigil, serving as bridge between seen and unseen, known and forgotten, present comfort and ancient wisdom. Thorn's legacy lived not just in restored mechanism, but in renewed awareness that extraordinary stories often wait beneath ordinary surfaces, ready to reveal themselves to those who approach the world with curiosity and wonder.